An experienced carpenter was hired to build an isolated house for a mysterious client who paid in cash and never questioned the budget. As construction progressed, he discovered he was creating something sinister, a house specifically designed to imprison and torture people. This is the real story of how greed can lead us to participate in unimaginable horrors and how some decisions haunt us forever. Leave in the comments, would you have stopped construction after realizing what you were building, even if it meant losing a lot of money? Chapter 1. Augusto Mendez had been working with wood for 22 years, but he had never faced financial pressure like what followed the economic downturn of 2020. At 39 years old, the master carpenter, who had once commanded premium rates for custom home construction, found himself competing for basic renovation jobs that paid a fraction of what his skills were worth. Living in a modest house with his wife Elena and their twin daughters, now 15 years old, Augusto had always prided himself on providing a comfortable middle-class life for his family. But the pandemic had devastated the luxury construction market that had been his specialty, forcing him to take on smaller projects that barely covered their monthly expenses. Elena worked part-time as a school secretary, but her income had also been reduced due to budget cuts in the education system. The twins, Maria and Sofia, were approaching their final years of high school, and Augusto knew that college tuition costs were looming just around the corner. During the worst of their financial struggles, Augusto had often thought about the advanced woodworking techniques he had been studying through TED's Woodworking, a comprehensive system that promised to help skilled craftsmen transition into high-end custom work and specialty projects. The detailed guides showed how experienced carpenters could build premium furniture and architectural elements that commanded much higher prices than standard construction work. But implementing those advanced techniques required an initial investment in specialized tools and materials that Augusto simply couldn't afford while struggling to meet basic family expenses. The irony was that he possessed the skills to earn significantly more money, but lacked the financial cushion necessary to make the transition to premium work. It was during this desperate period that Augusto received the phone call that would change his life forever, though not in the way he had hoped. "Mr. Mendez," said the calm, professional voice on the other end of the line, "my name is David Richardson. I understand you're one of the finest carpenters in the region, and I have a project that requires someone with your level of expertise." The project Richardson described was unlike anything Augusto had worked on before. A custom home to be built on a remote 40-acre property designed according to very specific architectural plans that Richardson would provide. The timeline was flexible, the budget was generous, and most importantly, Richardson was prepared to pay in cash with a substantial advance that would immediately solve Augusto's financial problems. "The location is quite isolated," Richardson explained during their initial meeting at an upscale coffee shop downtown. "Privacy is extremely important to me, which is why I'm willing to pay premium rates for both quality work and absolute discretion." Richardson was a well-dressed man in his early 50s, with the polished appearance of someone accustomed to wealth and authority. He spoke with the quiet confidence of a successful businessman, and his willingness to pay Augusto's full asking price without negotiation suggested that money was not a concern. "The house needs to be built exactly according to these specifications," Richardson said, handing Augusto a set of detailed architectural drawings. "I understand that some of the design elements might seem unusual, but I have very particular requirements for both privacy and security." The plans were indeed unusual, but Augusto initially attributed the strange features to the eccentric preferences of a wealthy client. The house would be relatively modest in size, only 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, but the construction specifications called for reinforced concrete walls, steel-reinforced doors, and a complex ventilation system that seemed overly elaborate for a residence. Most notably, several rooms in the basement were designed with no windows and only single points of entry, while the master bedroom included what the plans described as a secure storage area with vault-like construction specifications. Mr. Richardson, some of these design elements will be quite expensive to implement properly. Are you certain about these specifications? Money is not a concern, Mr. Mendez. I need this house built exactly as designed, using the highest quality materials and craftsmanship available. I'm prepared to pay whatever is necessary to ensure that every detail meets my requirements. The advance payment Richardson offered was more money than Augusto had seen in 2 years of struggling with small projects. It would immediately eliminate the family's debt, allow Elena to return to full-time employment without financial pressure, and provide the resources Augusto needed to eventually transition to the high-end woodworking business he had been planning. Against Elena's initial reservations about the project's unusually secretive nature, Augusto accepted Richardson's offer and began work on what would become the most lucrative and ultimately most devastating project of his career. The construction site was located in a heavily wooded area 50 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a private road that Richardson had specifically constructed for the project. The isolation was complete. No neighbors, no passing traffic, and no oversight from building inspectors who might question the unusual construction specifications. Augusto's first weeks on the project proceeded smoothly enough. The foundation work was straightforward, though he noted that the concrete specifications were far heavier than necessary for a building of this size. The framing work required precision due to the reinforced construction, but Augusto's years of experience allowed him to execute Richardson's plans efficiently. Richardson visited the site weekly, always arriving in different vehicles and always carrying cash payments that kept Augusto motivated despite his growing unease about certain aspects of the construction. It was during the 4th week of construction that Augusto first began to question what he was really building. As he worked on the interior framing for the basement rooms, he realized that the secure storage area was designed more like a cell than a closet. The door would be reinforced steel with locks that operated only from the outside, and the ventilation system was minimal, adequate to keep someone alive, but not comfortable. When Augusto mentioned his concerns to Richardson during his next site visit, the client's response was both generous and evasive. Mr. Mendez, I appreciate your attention to detail, but I assure you that every element of this design serves a specific security purpose. I deal with valuable assets that require the highest level of protection, and this house is designed to provide that security. Richardson's explanation was accompanied by a substantial bonus payment and a reminder that discretion was a key part of their agreement. The money was enough to begin buying the specialized equipment Augusto would need to transition to premium woodworking, making Richardson's project feel like the bridge to a better financial future. But as construction progressed and more of the house's unusual features became apparent, Augusto found it increasingly difficult to ignore the growing evidence that he was building something designed not for security, but for imprisonment. Chapter 2. By the 8th week of construction, Augusto could no longer pretend that Richardson's house was simply an eccentric rich man's security-conscious residence. The features he was building were becoming impossible to explain as anything other than a sophisticated prison designed to hold people against their will. The basement storage rooms had been completed with reinforced steel doors that locked from the outside, soundproof walls that would prevent anyone inside from calling for help, and ventilation systems that could be controlled remotely from other parts of the house. Each room contained a drain in the floor and mounting points on the walls that served no apparent purpose in a normal residence. Most disturbing was the workshop area that Richardson had requested in the basement, which included specialized electrical outlets, eye bolts mounted in the concrete ceiling, and storage areas designed to hold items that Augusto was beginning to suspect were not ordinary tools. The main floor of the house continued the pattern of features that made sense only if the building was designed to control and monitor people who didn't want to be there. Windows were positioned to provide clear sight lines to all approaches to the property. Interior doors could be locked remotely from a central control panel, and the kitchen was designed to be accessible only to someone who had keys to multiple locked doors. Richardson's weekly visits had become increasingly tense as Augusto struggled to hide his growing awareness of what he was really building. The client seemed to sense Augusto's unease and had begun making comments that were clearly intended as warnings about the importance of discretion. "Mr. Mendez, I hope you understand that the success of this project depends entirely on your ability to complete the work without discussing it with anyone. There are people who would misunderstand my security requirements and might create problems for both of us." The implied threat was clear, but so was Augusto's growing realization that he had become complicit in creating something that could be used to commit terrible crimes. The money Richardson was paying him was solving his family's financial problems, but it was also making him a participant in what was clearly a criminal enterprise. During this period, Augusto found himself returning repeatedly to his study of Ted's woodworking, not just for the technical knowledge, but for the sense of working on something positive and constructive. The advanced woodworking techniques represented the kind of honest, skilled craftsmanship that was the opposite of what he was doing for Richardson. Reading about precision joinery and beautiful furniture construction served as a reminder of why he had become a carpenter in the first place, to create things that made people's lives better rather than to enable someone to hurt others. It was while working on the house's security room, a space that could only be described as a command center for monitoring and controlling the other rooms, that Augusto made the discovery that forced him to confront the full horror of what he was building. Hidden within the architectural plans, in technical drawings that he had initially dismissed as electrical diagrams, Augusto found detailed schematics for restraint systems, surveillance equipment, and medical monitoring devices that made the house's true purpose unmistakably clear. Richardson wasn't building a secure residence. He was building a sophisticated facility for kidnapping, imprisoning, and torturing people. The realization hit Augusto with physical force as he sat alone in the partially completed house, surrounded by the walls and rooms he had been crafting with his own hands. Every skilled cut, every precisely fitted joint, every carefully installed component had been contributing to the creation of a place where people would suffer and possibly die. Augusto's phone rang as he was studying the hidden schematics, and Richardson's name appeared on the caller ID. For the first time since beginning the project, Augusto didn't answer immediately, knowing that he could no longer pretend ignorance about what he was building. When he finally returned Richardson's call later that evening, the conversation confirmed Augusto's worst fears about his situation. "Mr. Mendez, I notice that work seemed to slow down today. I hope you're not having second thoughts about our agreement." "Mr. Richardson, I've been reviewing the plans more carefully, and I have some concerns about certain specifications." "Mr. Mendez," Richardson interrupted with a calm voice that somehow conveyed more menace than shouting would have. "I thought we had established that these specifications are not negotiable. You were hired to build, not to ask questions." "But some of these features don't make sense for a normal residence." "This is not a normal residence, Mr. Mendez. And you are not a normal contractor. You are someone who has been generously compensated to complete a specific project without complications. I trust that you understand the importance of meeting your obligations." The threat in Richardson's voice was unmistakable, But so was Augusto's realization that he had reached a crossroads that would define the rest of his life. He could continue building Richardson's House of Horrors and become fully complicit in whatever crimes it would be used for, or he could find the courage to stop participating in something he knew was evil. That night, Augusto sat in his workshop at home, surrounded by the tools and projects that represented 2 decades of honest craftsmanship. The money from Richardson's project had allowed him to pay off debts and purchase some of the specialized equipment he needed for advanced woodworking, but it had also trapped him in a situation where his skills were being used to enable terrible crimes. Elena found him there at 2 in the morning, staring at a half-finished jewelry box he had been creating for Sophia's upcoming birthday. "Augusto, what's wrong? You've been different since you started this new project." For the first time since accepting Richardson's job, Augusto told someone the truth about what he was building. As Elena listened in growing horror to his description of the house's real purpose, Augusto finally acknowledged what he had been trying to avoid thinking about for weeks. "I have to stop, Elena. I can't finish building that place, no matter how much money he's paying us. What about the money we still owe him? What if he comes after us?" Augusto looked at his wife and daughters, thinking about the comfortable life that Richardson's money was providing them. And then he thought about the people who would suffer in the rooms he was building. "Some things are more important than money," Augusto said. "I'd rather lose everything we have than know that I helped someone hurt innocent people." The decision to walk away from Richardson's project would prove to be the most dangerous choice of Augusto's life, but it was also the only choice that would allow him to look at himself in the mirror without seeing the face of someone who had sold his soul for financial security. What do you think about Augusto's situation? Should he have walked away earlier when he first noticed the strange features, or do you understand why financial pressure made him rationalize what he was seeing? Leave your opinion in the comments about how you would handle discovering you were building something so sinister. Chapter 3. Augusto's decision to abandon Richardson's project was easier to make than to execute. Walking away meant forfeiting the remaining payments that would have totaled nearly $40,000, money that his family desperately needed and that Richardson would certainly not pay for unfinished work. More dangerous was the certainty that Richardson would not simply accept Augusto's departure from the project. A man building a sophisticated torture facility would not tolerate loose ends, especially loose ends who possessed detailed knowledge of what he was constructing and where. But Augusto also understood that continuing to work on the house would make him a full accomplice to whatever crimes Richardson planned to commit. Every additional day of construction would deepen his complicity and make it harder to claim ignorance if the authorities eventually discovered what he had helped create. The morning after his conversation with Elena, Augusto drove to the construction site with the intention of retrieving his tools and informing Richardson that he could not continue with the project. But when he arrived at the isolated property, he found Richardson waiting for him with 2 other men who had the unmistakable bearing of professional criminals. "Mr. Mendez," Richardson said with his usual calm politeness, "I understand you may be having some concerns about our project. I thought it might be helpful if we discussed those concerns in person." The 2 men with Richardson said nothing, but their presence made the nature of the conversation unmistakably clear. Augusto was not being given an opportunity to quit. He was being warned about the consequences of trying to leave. "I've been thinking about the project specifications," Augusto said carefully, "and I'm concerned that some of the features might not meet building codes if they're ever inspected." Richardson smiled, but the expression was more predatory than friendly. "Mr. Mendez, I think you may be overthinking the situation. This is a private residence on private property, and code compliance is not a concern. Your job is simply to complete the construction according to my specifications. But if someone were to ask questions about what I built here, No one will ask questions, Mr. Mendez, because no one will know what you built here. The location is isolated, the property is private, and our agreement includes very clear provisions about confidentiality. One of Richardson's companions stepped forward slightly, a movement that seemed casual, but conveyed an unmistakable threat. "I think what Mr. Richardson is trying to explain," the man said in a voice that was professionally calm, "is that you've already seen too much to walk away from this project. The best thing for everyone is if you finish what you started and forget that this place exists." Augusto realized that he was trapped in a situation where his knowledge of Richardson's project made him a liability regardless of whether he continued working or tried to quit. Richardson and his associates couldn't allow him to leave with the ability to describe what he had built, but they also couldn't risk harming him in a way that might trigger a police investigation. "I understand," Augusto said, hoping to buy time while he figured out how to escape the situation safely. "I'll continue with the construction as planned." Richardson's expression relaxed slightly. "I'm glad we could clarify the situation, Mr. Mendez. I've always believed that reasonable people can resolve their differences through honest communication. But as Augusto returned to work on the house's sinister features, he was also developing a plan that would allow him to both escape Richardson's control and prevent the completed house from being used for its intended criminal purposes. During this terrifying period, Augusto found himself thinking often about the principles he had been learning through Ted's woodworking. The comprehensive system emphasized not just technical skills, but also the importance of building a sustainable business based on integrity and quality craftsmanship. Call to action. The idea of being able to choose his own projects and clients, working only on jobs that aligned with his values, had never seemed more appealing than it did while he was trapped building a torture chamber for a criminal. If you're tired of being forced into compromising situations just to pay the bills, discover how Ted's woodworking can give you the independence to build a business based on your principles. Click here to learn how thousands of craftsmen have transformed their careers and taken control of their professional lives. Richardson's threats had made it clear that Augusto couldn't simply walk away from the project, but they had also revealed that Richardson was planning to use the house for crimes serious enough that witnesses couldn't be allowed to survive. Augusto understood that he was building not just a prison, but his own death sentence. The solution came to Augusto while he was installing the electronic control systems that would allow Richardson to monitor and control the house's various imprisonment features. If he could document everything about the house and Richardson's plans and arrange for that evidence to reach law enforcement if anything happened to him, it might provide both protection for his family and justice for Richardson's future victims. Using his phone camera, Augusto began secretly documenting every aspect of the house's construction, including the hidden schematics he had discovered and Richardson's own comments about the building's intended use. He also started wearing a small digital recorder during Richardson's site visits, capturing conversations that clearly established the criminal purpose of the construction. Most importantly, Augusto made contact with Detective Maria Santos, an investigator he had met during a previous construction project involving insurance fraud. Without revealing his current situation, Augusto arranged for Detective Santos to receive sealed packages of evidence that would be automatically delivered if he failed to check in with a third party on a regular schedule. The investigation package included photographs of the house's torture chamber features, copies of the construction plans showing restraint and monitoring systems, recordings of Richardson's threats, and a detailed written account of everything Augusto had observed during the construction process. If Richardson killed him to ensure his silence, the evidence would automatically reach law enforcement and lead to both Richardson's arrest and the discovery of his torture facility before it could be used to harm anyone. But Augusto also realized that his safety plan depended on completing enough of the construction to avoid suspicion, while secretly sabotaging key systems to render the house useless for its intended purpose. It was a dangerous gamble that required him to maintain the pretense of cooperation while actually working against Richardson's interests. The electronic control systems that Augusto was installing included hidden flaws that would cause them to fail at critical moments. The reinforced doors included subtle weaknesses that would allow them to be forced open from the inside. Most importantly, the house's isolation would be compromised by surveillance equipment that Augusto secretly installed to monitor Richardson's activities. As construction neared completion and Richardson began making comments about testing the facility, Augusto knew that his time was running out. The house would soon be finished, Richardson would no longer need a carpenter, and Augusto's knowledge of the project would become a liability that could only be resolved through his elimination. Thank you so much for staying with us this far in this incredible story. We truly appreciate your dedication as a viewer, and believe me, the best is yet to come. What follows will show us how Augusto's desperate gamble to escape Richardson's trap led to one of the most dramatic confrontations in construction crime history. Chapter 4. The final weeks of construction were a nightmare of maintaining appearances while secretly preparing for what Augusto knew would be a confrontation that could cost him his life. Richardson had become increasingly impatient for the project's completion, visiting the site daily and making comments that suggested he already had victims selected for his torture facility. "Mr. Mendez," Richardson said during one of his inspections, "I'm impressed with the quality of your work. This facility will serve my purposes perfectly for many years to come." The word facility instead of house confirmed what Augusto had suspected about Richardson's plans. This wasn't intended to be a residence at all, but a dedicated location for imprisoning and torturing people who would never be expected to leave alive. Augusto's secret documentation had revealed that Richardson was part of a criminal organization that specialized in kidnapping wealthy individuals for ransom, torture, and ultimately murder. The isolated house was designed to be a place where victims could be held for extended periods, while their families were extorted, and where the evidence of their suffering could be permanently eliminated. But Richardson's confidence in his security had made him careless about concealing his plans from Augusto. During the final construction phase, Richardson had brought associates to the site who discussed their operations with the assumption that Augusto would not survive to repeat what he heard. "The first subject arrives next week," one of Richardson's partners mentioned during a site visit. "We'll have 3 weeks to extract the maximum financial value before disposal becomes necessary." Augusto continued working while secretly recording these conversations, building an evidence file that would eventually expose the entire criminal organization. But he also knew that his own survival depended on timing his escape perfectly, too early, and Richardson would hunt him down, too late, and he would become the facility's first victim. The breakthrough came when Augusto discovered that Richardson planned to kill him immediately after the final construction inspection, which was scheduled for the following Friday. The conversation he recorded made Richardson's intentions unmistakably clear. "The carpenter has been useful, but he knows too much to be allowed to leave. We'll handle his disposal the same way we'll handle the others, quick, clean, and permanent." Augusto realized he had less than a week to escape Richardson's trap and ensure that law enforcement could act before the torture facility became operational. On Wednesday evening, 2 days before the scheduled inspection, Augusto triggered the evidence delivery system he had established with Detective Santos. The packages containing photographs, recordings, and documentation of Richardson's criminal enterprise were automatically delivered to both the police and the FBI, along with detailed maps showing the location of the torture facility. But Augusto also knew that law enforcement response would take time, and Richardson would certainly kill him if he suspected that his operations had been exposed. Augusto's only chance for survival was to disappear immediately, while making it appear that his absence was due to an accident or medical emergency rather than deliberate flight. Thursday morning, Augusto called Richardson to report that he had suffered a serious injury at another job site and would be unable to complete the final day of work. He claimed to be in the hospital and suggested that Richardson could conduct his final inspection without the carpenter present. The lie bought Augusto 24 hours, but it also triggered Richardson's suspicions. By Thursday afternoon, Richardson had discovered that Augusto was not actually in any hospital and began searching for the carpenter, who suddenly knew too much about his criminal operations. Augusto spent Thursday night hiding in his own workshop, armed with the tools of his trade and waiting for either Richardson's killers or law enforcement to arrive first. Elena and the twins had been moved to a safe location, but Augusto had remained behind to face whatever consequences his decision to expose Richardson would bring. The confrontation came at dawn on Friday, when Richardson arrived at Augusto's house with the same two associates who had threatened him at the construction site. But they found the house empty except for Augusto, who was waiting in his workshop with evidence of Richardson's crimes and a determination to ensure that the torture facility would never be used. "Mr. Mendez," Richardson said as he entered the workshop, "I'm disappointed that you've chosen to make this situation complicated. We could have concluded our business arrangement amicably." "Our business arrangement was building a torture chamber for you to murder people in," Augusto replied. "There was never going to be an amicable conclusion to that." Richardson's mask of polite professionalism finally dropped, revealing the cold-blooded killer underneath. "You have no idea what you've interfered with, Carpenter. Our organization has been operating successfully for years because we eliminate loose ends like you." "Your organization is finished," Augusto said. "The FBI has everything: photographs, recordings, construction plans, and the location of your facility. Even if you kill me, you can't stop what's already in motion." The sound of approaching sirens confirmed Augusto's words. Detective Santos had coordinated with federal agents to raid both Richardson's torture facility and arrest the criminal organization's leadership simultaneously. Richardson's final act was an attempt to kill Augusto before law enforcement could take him into custody, but the carpenter's intimate knowledge of his own workshop gave him advantages that Richardson hadn't anticipated. The same tools that Augusto had used to build Richardson's torture chamber became weapons that allowed him to defend himself until police could intervene. The arrest of Richardson and his associates led to the discovery of one of the most sophisticated kidnapping and torture operations in federal law enforcement history. The facility that Augusto had been forced to build was designed to hold multiple victims simultaneously while their families were extorted for ransom payments that would never result in the victim's release. But perhaps most importantly, Augusto's courage in exposing the operation had prevented the facility from ever being used. Richardson had been arrested before his first victim could be brought to the isolated house, meaning that Augusto's skills had been used to build a prison that would never imprison anyone. Chapter 5. The federal prosecution of Richardson's criminal organization became one of the most significant kidnapping cases in the region's history, with Augusto serving as the primary witness whose evidence had made the entire investigation possible. The torture facility he had been forced to build became crucial evidence in securing convictions that would keep Richardson and his associates in prison for the rest of their lives. But while justice was served, the psychological cost to Augusto was enormous. He had spent months using his skills to create something designed to cause unimaginable suffering, and the knowledge that his hands had built rooms where people were meant to be tortured would haunt him for years. The media attention surrounding the case had made Augusto's role in exposing the criminal organization well known, but it had also made it difficult for him to return to normal construction work. Potential clients were either afraid to associate with someone connected to such a high-profile criminal case, or they were morbidly curious about his experience building a torture facility. During the months following Richardson's arrest, Augusto struggled with depression and anxiety that made it difficult to work with the tools and materials that reminded him of the horrors he had been forced to create. The sound of power tools, the smell of sawdust, and the sight of construction plans all triggered memories of building Richardson's House of Horrors. It was Elena who suggested that Augusto needed to find a way to use his skills for something positive and healing, something that would help him associate his craftsmanship with creation rather than destruction. "You need to build something beautiful," she told him during one of his darkest periods, "something that brings joy instead of pain, something that helps people instead of hurting them." Augusto's path to healing began with a return to the advanced woodworking techniques he had been studying through Ted's woodworking before Richardson's project had trapped him in a nightmare. The detailed guides for creating fine furniture and decorative pieces represented everything that was opposite to the utilitarian horror he had been forced to construct. Working with his hands to create beautiful, functional pieces that would bring pleasure to their owners became a form of therapy that helped Augusto reclaim his identity as a craftsman who built things that made the world better rather than worse. His first post-Richardson project was a custom dining table for a family whose previous table had been destroyed in a house fire. The commission came through a victims' rights organization that helped crime witnesses rebuild their lives, and the symbolism was not lost on Augusto. He was using his skills to replace something that had been destroyed rather than to create something destructive. The precision and care required for fine woodworking forced Augusto to focus on positive techniques and beautiful results, gradually replacing his memories of building torture devices with new experiences of creating furniture that families would treasure for generations. Word of Augusto's exceptional craftsmanship spread through the victims' rights community and beyond, leading to commissions from clients who specifically wanted to support someone who had risked everything to prevent terrible crimes. His workshop became a place where survivors of various traumas could commission custom pieces that symbolized their recovery and new beginnings. One of Augusto's most meaningful projects was a series of memorial benches for a park dedicated to crime victims. Each bench was crafted with techniques from Ted's woodworking that emphasized both beauty and durability, creating lasting monuments that honored people who had suffered while providing peaceful spaces for reflection and healing. The success of these projects led to Augusto's recognition as one of the region's premier custom woodworkers, specializing in pieces that carried emotional significance for their owners. His reputation was built not just on technical excellence, but on his understood commitment to using his skills for positive purposes. The financial success of his custom woodworking business eventually exceeded what he had been earning from standard construction work, proving that skilled craftsmen could build profitable careers while maintaining their integrity and choosing projects that aligned with their values. Maria and Sophia, now in college, often spoke proudly of their father's courage in exposing Richardson's criminal organization. But they were equally proud of how he had rebuilt his career around creating beautiful things that brought joy to people's lives. "Dad, what you did with that terrible man was brave," Sophia said during one of her visits home from college. "But what you've done since then is just as important. You've shown that skilled people can choose to build a better world instead of just accepting whatever work pays the bills." The psychological scars from his experience with Richardson would never completely heal. But Augusto had learned that trauma could be transformed into purpose. Every beautiful piece he created, using the advanced techniques from Ted's woodworking, was a rejection of the ugliness he had been forced to participate in, and a contribution to a world where craftsmanship served humanity rather than destroying it. Detective Santos, who had become a friend during the investigation and prosecution of Richardson's organization, often visited Augusto's workshop to see his latest projects and to discuss how skilled professionals could identify and report suspicious activities. "Mr. Mendez," Detective Santos said during one of her visits, "what you went through was terrible, but you've turned it into something that helps other people recognize when they're being asked to participate in crimes. Your story has been used in training programs to help construction workers understand the warning signs of criminal operations." Augusto had indeed become a speaker for law enforcement training programs, sharing his experience to help other skilled workers recognize when their expertise was being misused for criminal purposes. His presentations emphasized both the warning signs he had missed early in Richardson's project and the importance of having the financial independence to walk away from questionable jobs. The most important lesson, Augusto would tell his audiences, is that skilled workers need to have options. When you're desperate for money, you're vulnerable to people who want to misuse your talents. Building a successful independent business gives you the freedom to choose projects that align with your values. 5 years after Richardson's arrest, Augusto stood in his expanded workshop, surrounded by commissions for custom furniture, memorial pieces, and artistic woodwork that had waiting lists extending months into the future. The advanced techniques he had mastered through Ted's woodworking had not only provided financial security, but had also given him a way to transform his traumatic experience into meaningful work that helped others heal and remember. The house of horrors he had been forced to build had been demolished immediately after the investigation concluded, but the beautiful pieces flowing from his workshop represented a lasting testament to the power of skilled craftsmanship directed toward positive purposes. And in the quiet evening hours when he worked alone on his most intricate projects, Augusto found peace in the knowledge that his hands, which had once been forced to build something evil, were now dedicated entirely to creating beauty, comfort, and healing for a world that needed more of all three. This story shows us how financial need can blind us to signs that we're participating in something terrible. Augusto learned the hard way that some jobs, no matter how much they pay, have too high a moral price. Sometimes losing money is better than losing your soul. What would you do if you discovered you were building something to hurt people? Tell us your opinion about this disturbing story in the comments. If you were moved, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell for more shocking real stories. And don't miss the next video with another story that will leave you speechless.